Hello and welcome to State Archives New South Wales mini webinar Indexed Tramway Staff Registers. Now I couldn't resist, on the main screen I'm showing you one of our excellent photographs that is a tram going down Main Street Broken Hill, which is just I couldn't resist in the sense that it shows you some of the beauty of our archives and also it is a tram in action. In the spirit of reconciliation, New South Wales State Archives acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Now I'm going to move on to the website now for the next part of the presentation. My goal today is going to be to show you and to build your confidence that you can find tramway registers, and then once we know how to find them, we can then see the differences between them and to learn how to use them and how in some cases they'll lead to other records. So without further ado, let's begin. Now I started with an example that applies to me particularly as your webinar presenter today, because I've read a lot of these cards now and I wanted to look at an index result where I can get a lot of results without moving into other things. So if you go to online indexes, you can do this. I click T, I go to tramways, and now search the index. If you're curious about what's in the index, click more. But for today's purposes, I'm going straight in, and I'm going to search very creatively for John Smith. And it brings up results immediately, 2 pages worth of John Smith's. So it gives me just tramway workers. I can click details and their cards their register entries will come up. Now for the majority of you, you're going to probably more often find them in our main search engines. John Smith will bring up results for all sorts of things. Just a quick look at this. You know, I call this an untidy search because you have to filter it down to what you're looking for. The easiest way to do it for today's subject is to write the word tramway or tramways, because every entry is going to have, just taking off the S, every entry is going to have tramway employees. And as you can see, that search is very tidy and it worked very effectively. So the way to then go into the item is to click on the item result. Now this is an item result like anything else in our collection. It tells us which series it's from, if you can copy it or if you can order it, which is not the case now because they're available online. So we go straight back to the thumbnail and we click on the thumbnail to draw it forward in high resolution. So now we're going to talk more about the records, and for the purposes of doing webinars, I like to pop this into the main browser. I'm just going to do it now. That clicks it, pops it out. It then loads in the main browser. And the reason I do this is because when I'm doing a webinar, I want to be able to do this. Yeah, do you see? Zoom in, zoom out with my mouse wheel. So we're looking for John Smith on this page. Now you'll notice that Henry Davis there, I think it is. And so we move down and we're looking for John Smith, and there he is right there. John Smith, born 11th of the 5th, 1857. Now, if we look along, we get like a potted history of John Smith. He was a driver, he was a foreman, he was a driver. Now, if I look over here at the pay section, he got 13 shillings a day while a driver and 2 stints, and he got 9 shillings while he was a foreman. So that's per day. It's sometimes written as per day at the top of the column. And if you go over to the right-hand side and zoom in, I'm just doing a little bit of work on making it easy for us to read. There's John. We go to the end of his column, we can see that he was reduced for 3 months. Now, a reason not given. We've got a date and that's all we've got, and we've got to go with that. And we also know that 2 months later he was reinstated. So that could be for one of a number of reasons. I was curious if that was connected to the Great Depression of that time, but I couldn't prove it, so that's just a theory. Now going to the top of the page, we're going to now look around the subject and just see what these sorts of records can tell us. You see that first item, which is Henry Davis. He was a driver, a foreman cleaner, a shed-man, a night watchman, a leading cleaner, a night watchman, and his pay varied quite a bit through the times. It gives you the dates that he earned the pay scales. So when you start looking at records that are relating to staff, the first job is like your family history. Your first job is to know the family tree. Well, when you're looking at career records, it really is to get a timeline happening. At what time what were they doing and where were they based? In this case, you can see it gives you that kind of information. The longer they're in the service, the more entries there will be. Now, if we zoom in on the right-hand side, let's go to the elephant in the room, shall we? The writing is really hard to read. Yes, that's true, it is. It's hard for an archivist. It's the sort of thing that I would sit down and put a lot of time into if I wanted to transcribe any one section, but it's certainly not impossible. Think of it as a nut. Inside that nut and through that hard exterior is going to be a lot of information. And the second thing I'd like to showcase for people is that these records were not created for family historians in the future. They're actually working documents. So they're writing in their own handwriting for their own uses at the time of the writing. So in a sense, it's like looking at my handwriting when I make notes, which is something I wouldn't share with a third party willingly. I'd probably want to try again and do it neater, and perhaps it's the same for you. So in a sense, this lack of neatness is a sign that it's a working document. But now let's look through it, and now let's move on to what does it tell us? And it gives you lots of little potted history details. So I'm going to browse down to some interesting ones. There's one that's obvious. He resigned. This person here was dispensed with, failed by eyesight test. Yeah, so we get a little bit of relevant information on that entry for the person that we're researching, and you'll see it quite a lot in lots of dissimilar things. What I noticed when I was preparing for today's webinar is that it was very easy to be dispensed with or to lose your position on a medical test or an eyesight test in the tramways. Allowed 1 month leave, yeah. Dispensed tickets, appealed against regulations, I think, and appealed. Dismissed last day, cash fare irregularities. Now, this is something that comes forward quite a bit as well. If there's wrongdoing, quite often it's going to be to do with disseminating taking the money and delivering the tickets. So this is actually a very, very not common, but it is a recurring theme that you will see in the different records. This person's been reinstated, reprimanded, and so forth. Now, this one's interesting. He had his kidney removed, so he couldn't work at one time, and another time written off books and attempted suicide, which I hope that's not as harsh as it sounds, but it draws forward this kind of personal details, which can be quite fascinating. Another person in the center of the screen now on the left, to be retired, failed eyesight, and to have a gratuity. Now, I'm just a little bit curious what that person's age is. He was born in 58. He entered service in 78. And the date on this is, I believe, 1893. 07, excuse me, I didn't see it till now, 07. So that person is 57 by that time, which gives you a little sense of the backstory to that one case. Let's go to another example. This is about building your confidence and experience. We're going to look at someone else now. We're going to go with, actually we'll go with Henry Davis, because it leads to other records. So if you go to the top of this page, I'm just going to use this page one more time. Henry Davis happens to be the first person on the page at the top there. And I highlighted him in the sense that he's a foreman cleaner and so forth. Excuse me while I just zoom in, there we are. Now you can notice on the left-hand side there, it's got card written. Now what's interesting is that cards weren't generally written for tramways in this time period. They used the registers, but the cards were written in this time period for railways. Now something that's interesting to note, if you know a little bit about the changes in the agencies, you can then sometimes interpret the records. Now I happen to know, and we happen to know as at State Archives, that the railways and tramways were combined between 1907 and 1932. And in that time period, I would expect them to have a card written in the railway employees. So we're going to test that little theory right on this one. Okay, so we're going back. I'm going out of my example, going back to the main screen. Now we need to get rid of that tramway reference. Oh, and also I have to put Henry Davis. Henry Herbert Davis. I'm just checking if my notes are correct. It's just Henry Davis. Okay, Henry Davis it is. So I click Henry Davis and I put search. Now this is going to search the entire collection. So you're going to find things like business records and so forth, which leads me to the next skill I'll share with you today. And that is you need to somehow find a way to filter down to what you're looking for. Now today being a webinar, I'm looking for a railway history card. And if I look on the right-hand side, I can see the link in items and series to NRS 12922. Now I've just put a little bit of highlight on it for you. If I click that, it brings up people named Henry Davis with career cards. I believe this first one is the right man. Go in. Actually, it isn't. Excuse me while I back out. This gives you a quick sense, though, of the kinds of things that we do get on the railway cards. They're going to take what you find in the tramway records, and they take it just a little bit further. I seem to have a lock-up, so excuse me while I work out what to do. Okay, I'm going to look for Henry Herbert Davis. Ah, that's why. That's Tramway. And now I take off the Tramway, and then we see if we've got a career card. And we go down to personal history. Whoops. There's a little bit of lag on the server at the moment. So railway personal history cards, I click on that now. And there it is. We have a career card for that Henry Davis. So what this does is it goes a little bit further than the previous Tramway card. It gives you a longer career. It tells you what he was doing at different times. It does a similar sort of thing. It'll give you dates and pay rates, which is listed down the right-hand side. But as you can see, the cards go just a little bit further than the tramway registers. And so if you've got card written and a name crossed out, you should always be looking for the railway cards. And it's probably from this period of 1907 through to 1932. Now, if you noticed, he died in service, and it says on the right-hand side that he was deceased on a certain date, 10/4/19, single man, left a will, and his executrix is Miss Ellen Johnson. So that begs the question, is there a record we can go to? And the answer is, of course, because we have probates. The best way to bring that forward is to write death. And he died in 1919. There it is. And this is his probate. And so for a family historian, I've now showed you 3 lines of records just coming from the Tramways register. Now this is where we'll stop because it's a webinar about tramway registers, but I wanted to show you that way leads on to way, and records can then sometimes give you clues for other ways to search. So we'll go with another mainline example, something in the tramways. And there's Samuel Miller. We click in, we go in, just repeating the same techniques to make it easy for me to present for you, and also for you at home perhaps, if you like what I'm doing. I'm popping it into the browser because now I can zoom in and zoom out really easily. And for the needs of what I'm doing, it's the way to go. Now it shows you that his date of first appointment was in 1884. Previous appointments 45. Let's see. So it sounds like there's a story there. He was appointed in April, and then somehow there was a second appointment in July. Don't know what to make of that. It could be he was casual. That's the most likely thing I can think of off the top of my head. He was paid 7 shillings and 6 pence, 8 shillings as well, different time periods, and resigned in 1885. So this is you get a little part of the history, and you can go down the page, and let's see if there's any other lessons to be learned on this page. You'll notice that it's a lot easier, prettier on the eye record, this one, isn't it? We actually have 3 lines of registers, and there were different registers used for different purposes at different times. But at the end of the day, there's one line, this one, that is very neat and tidy. That I think they just gave more space for each person, and it does make it a lot easier for us. So they're mixed into the series. There's 3 types, and I'm showing you all of them today. Now, if we go down here, this one's interesting because he's a very colourful man. We're going to have to check out who this is. Hinksman. Okay, C. Hinksman. a conductor. He's employed from the period of 1892 onwards. Now, if we go over here, there's a lot of activity on his remarks. Now, I just want to stop here for a moment and look at it from the global point of view. You might be thinking, good God, that is hard to read. And the answer is, I agree entirely. It is hard to read. And it's one of those things you always got to remember with these records is they're working documents. And so therefore, we're not looking at something that was prepared for family historians, and we need to put the work in to understand their handwriting. And it's probably someone's personal handwriting for their own personal use. But if we don't dive in and then we put a little bit of time into looking into what this says, I've actually taken down a bit of his history because I put some time into it. The first bit is rudeness to passenger. He was given a reprimand. The second one is he dissented to his pay being made 8 and 6 for a month. So I think that's probably connected. This one's interesting. He allowed his child to play with a register, causing an error in registration. That is an interesting one. The next one along, it was fined, I think, 1. So it's hard to say what that would be. And I couldn't quite interpret that word, but he was fined for some sort of damage. He's been given another fine for disobeying orders. And we'll trail off there. We'll move on to other things. But it gives you a sense, though, that when you're looking at the reprimands or the medical tests that have been taken, it gives you a sense of the person, and it can draw forward that family history that we're all looking for. I'm going to have a look for Hugh Gunn. Tramway. There he is. It's one of the series that is very neat by comparison to the other. I pop it out. I'm just going to look for him on the screen. There he is, number 2. And look at this. There's a card written for Hugh Gunn. We're going to have a look at that in a moment. I might make that one more example. He was appointed, date of birth certificate was he was born in 1884. Now you will find sometimes the date of birth and sometimes you won't. That's a little bit intermittent, but it can be there. And sometimes they write them on the first underneath the name of the person. He's on probation for 6 months in 1911. Now that is in that period, isn't it? From 1907 to 1932. So he will have a career card. Now, if we go out and we use the same technique as before, I'm just taking away the word tramway, which simplifies the results down to just tramways. We notice we're now finding other records. And lo and behold, that first one is a railway card. Now I'm just going to get his date of birth because there's 2 there. His date of birth was in 1884. So I come back and this first card is his card. Click on it. Now look at it in the image gallery. And we get that plotted history, and it proves that he was casually employed and he resigned. And I won't go too much further than that. You can see that you get a lot of information about him. The date he was in the super fund and so forth. Okay, we'll go back. Next search, and I'm beginning to think of, we're moving into the final phase now. But there's a few things I just really would love to share with you today. We go into Charles Edward Scully. The first thing I want to show you is, welcome to the archival world. There's a very excellent example of some damage, water damage on an archive. And that's the kind of thing when you're working with archives, you do get to see. That's a pretty nasty bit there, isn't it? But it was okay for scanning. It's probably not as bad as it looks. I pop it out first to start looking. Now we're looking for Charles Edward Scully, so I'm going down the page. A lot of cards written for these guys. There he is, Charles Edward Scully, who was a conductor in Sydney, casually employed. Now it's got an interesting remark over here, so I thought I'd highlight it for you. Oh, there's one, failed medically. Very common in these records. But this person here has provided the wrong date of birth upon entering service, and maybe kept on, but the date of entry in service is going to be count as from the 9th of the 5th, 1911, and to lose all previous seniority. Now he ended up losing 6 months for not giving his date. something that I learned when I was indexing the railway history cards is that there was, I think, a reasonably large number of people didn't know their date of birth because they were entered as born before 1900 or born in 1890s, that kind of thing. So I do wonder if the people didn't have access to knowing when they were born and didn't make the effort to get a birth certificate. It's an unknown, but I do wonder. We're going to look, I think I'll make this the final example until we move into the end game. And we'll go back, pop out, and I'm going to put in the name Ernest Miller, Tramway. And there he is, first one. Same process, it's one of the cluttered registers. Actually, it's extremely cluttered, isn't it? Pop it out into the browser so I can look at it more carefully. There he is, Ernest Miller there. Junior conductor. Bridge Street, dismissed, breach of Rule 67. Now, this is an interesting case because I actually went to some trouble to try and work out what Rule 67 was. And I went to a handbook of the tramways and they didn't have their rules. I saw all of their rules, but I didn't have rules numbered in a way that I could interpret that. But a very, very clever and fast operating member of our audience has worked out that that was a case that came up in court and it was mentioned in Trove. And essentially, breach of Rule 67 is he didn't tear up his tickets appropriately. Now that may seem quite trivial, but until you realise, of course, that there's money involved. If he's not tearing up his tickets, he's essentially, he could be stealing money or he could be stealing the tickets for further use and giving it to other people. So that was taken quite seriously and it is a dismissible offence. Now we go down the page and I don't think I've got too many new things to mention. I think you've got a really good sense of these things now. Your things to look for, card written, for example. So look at it from the point of view of what they're being paid at each stage and gives you a little potted history. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did in showing you the archives and what a fascinating place it is when you start to look under the hood. Good luck in your research. Bye for now.